app keeps stopping, so after all that, it won't work. Give me a minute.
Hit it again.
Huh?
There you go.
We'll hit it again. Let's try. Nope.
Uh-oh.
Because you're live here.
Huh?
You're live here.
Hi, we're live.
We're live. Oh, right.
We're going to be live elsewhere. Hi. So welcome to Social Media Breakfast of Houston. First time we've been live in 2 years.
So good. So good.
It's so good to see all of your beautiful faces here in the room. And if you're joining us on live stream, we're so excited to have you here too. So I'm really excited to have Ozeal specifically because also King of Houston, just amazing.
Wow.
So
Wow.
with the
Big title.
podcasting, yeah, it is. I think we should do it, right?
I'll take it.
Will you
Somebody called me the Podfather. So I was like, of Houston.
Oh, okay. I
And I
love
was like, I
Podfather.
kind of like that too, but yeah.
Podfather. Okay. So I'm gonna actually use the mic. I don't know if we need to in this room, but on the other hand, it does help with everybody online to hear us better too. So I don't know. I may have to start my whole phone over again. That's probably what I'm going to need to do. So if you just restart the phone, I will. You tell me what to do, and I'll do it. I have helpers. Thank you guys so much for helping out and being here. It takes a village sometimes to run this kind of a program. And so last night you guys had Pod Houston had an event. How many people came out for that?
We had over 60 people that came out. Yeah, over 60 people that came out. So it was a pretty awesome, a lot of new faces, and it was great just to see the community grow. So we've been seeing it.
Yay!
Awesome.
So that was awesome. And eventually we'll do the same. So we're going to meet in this room for the next couple of months. And what's cool is we could also have people, we can have speakers from out of town as well, because we can project them on the wall behind me. So that'll be interesting. I'll come, by the way, for an entire day and figure out the tech for that before we do it next time. But it's going to be really cool because we can have a real hybrid situation here at Impact Hub Houston. So I'm going to move out of the way for just a second and ask Michelle to come up and talk about Impact Hub Houston so that we can know a little bit about where we're at here. So we will get right into the program. For those of you who are online, don't worry, but I want you to be like a little bit FOMO for like missing out and being this amazing space. So come on, come sit and tell. Yeah, you can. Or you can sit with her so she feels
Okay. What's up, Carol? You can see him. We're friends.
I like this is our lot of lights.
Yeah, right.
Hello. Okay. Hi everybody. My name is Michelle Avalos, and I am the Deputy Director at Impact Hub Houston. Welcome to our space. You might have wondered why it says Downtown Launchpad when you walked in instead of Impact Hub Houston. This whole floor is actually called the Downtown Launchpad, and there's three core organizations that are based out of this floor. So it's Mass Challenge, Generator, which are also startup development organizations, and Impact Hub Houston. And so our focus at Impact Hub is actually supporting impact innovators and entrepreneurs that are truly trying to solve for some of the world's most pressing issues, but through entrepreneurship. And so we are locally rooted, but also globally connected in over 100 cities around the world. I think it's 106 now. We are just really excited to have you guys here today and to give members like Cami a platform to be able to do what they do best. And we're just here to be extra support system for you guys. So thank you for joining us. I'll have my cards at the front if you want to learn more. We do have a community membership for the space if you are looking for a place to work out of, and you can learn all about those benefits, mentorship, etc. After the event. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. That was a little louder, so that helps. So I'm excited to have you here, and we're going to be talking about having a podcast, launching a podcast. And I also had some people ask me before I got here, like, how to be a guest on a podcast. So you don't even have to have a podcast to be getting results out of podcasting. So let's just start with that. Tell us a little bit about you, what you do, a little bit about Pod Houston, and also kind of what why podcasting?
So I was one of my biggest dreams growing up was to be an MTV VJ. You guys remember MTV?
Yeah.
Yes. Interviewing celebrities and musicians. So when that dream failed, I discovered podcasting. I was like, well, this is a great opportunity for me to interview some of my heroes and, educate and build community. So I got introduced to podcasting 10 years ago. So I guess I'm considered an OG when it comes to podcasting, back when it wasn't a thing. So I started podcasting. It was an entrepreneur podcast because I really wanted to help other creatives learn about the power of business, entrepreneurship, branding, marketing. Hello. And so that's where I kind of got started, and then transitioned to maybe, it's probably like 5 years ago. I started a community called Pod Houston, which is Houston's fastest growing, biggest podcasting community here. As Cami mentioned, we just did an event, which was amazing. So it's growing every single event. So it's been great to see it grow. So now I also do podcast coaching with Ozeal Media. So I do podcast B2B coaching, also with a lot of personal brands, influencers, nonprofit organizations, on helping them launch a podcast and humanize their leadership through voice. Why podcasting? Podcasting is an opportunity, as I said, to humanize your leadership, to be able to build community. Now podcasting is growing in popularity. There's a lot of people now listening to podcasts. I was sharing a story last time, Candy, that even my mom, like 5 years ago, she's like, "What is it that you do?" I'm like, "Well, it's just, Mom, it's kind of like this online radio." And now Mom is listening to podcasts. So now Mom is listening. So now we're seeing the demographic grow, and more people are gravitating towards podcasts to get information, to get their education. And I call podcasting education and entertainment on wheels. It's listen to when you want, where you want. And I think that's the beauty of podcasting, whereas YouTube, which has a lot of, video is super powerful, right? Video marketing, but you got to be active, whereas podcasting is passive consumption. So I think that's the convenience, especially with this fast-paced society, that podcasting allows you to just plug in, get your education, get entertained, and of course, give you the opportunity to build community, whether you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, or a major organization. So that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, and some people might say, but why a podcast? Like, is it too late for podcasting? Because now all these people are coming into it. Like, so, I didn't start early, so okay, I can't do this.
Right, that's definitely a concern because of the popularity with podcasting. However, Cami, there's a stat that shows, during COVID, everybody started a podcast. We saw a big surge, over 50% of people launching podcasts, which was great. But now what we're seeing is there's only about maybe 800,000 active podcasts. So although the numbers are showing that it's a lot that are on Apple and Spotify, there's only maybe a handful, like 800 that are actually active. So there is a great opportunity at Landgrab to start podcasting now. I was talking to my friends over there in the back, especially like the Spanish speaking community. We're seeing podcasting grow up in India, places like Africa, Latin America. There is a land grab for people that are yearning for podcast audio content. And here in the US, it's getting competitive, but I think there's a great opportunity to be able to establish a personal brand with your voice and be able to share that with the world. So it's not too late. Now is the time to get started.
Yeah, I understand. I'm trying to remember exactly where the stat came from, but most podcasts only have 6 to 7 episodes, and then they stop. So it's a real big problem. So what we want to do today is really help you to understand where podcasting fits inside of your marketing strategy, and sort of how you're going to approach that. So I love that Ozeal has a really great acronym. We call it BAMM.
Bam.
Okay, so let's talk through BAMM. So can you talk? I got it for you in case you forget. But tell me what BAMM is.
So BAMM is it's a 4-step framework that I take all my clients. So when you're building a podcast, 4 things you need to consider. And actually there are 3 core, but the second one is more of the marketing side. But it's B stands for brand. Okay, you got to build a brand. I have clients, sometimes a common mistake with people that want to start a podcast is they have an idea. And then when you say, well, what is a podcast about? Well, I just want to inspire people. So it's very vague. Building a brand, what do you stand for? Planting your flag on the ground and saying, this is what I represent. This is the reputation. This is the change that I want to evoke in my community. And really being super clear on what your brand represents. A stands for audience. Attract an audience. How can you bring and create content that they want to listen to? What are their pain points, right? What are their problems, struggles? What's keeping them up? What are the results that they want to achieve? So really understanding the audience perspective, market listenership. The other M stands for marketing the podcast, right? So how can you get your podcast to your listeners? So you could do it several ways. You can find newsletters that are within your industries. And can I get into like the tactics and tips?
Yeah,
Can I jump right in?
we're gonna jump right in. Sure.
Yeah, okay, cool. Okay.
Go.
I'm kind of jumping right
No,
into the
you're
trenches.
like
Okay.
excited. Let's go.
I'm pumped up.
Let's go.
I'm ready.
Let's go.
No coffee yet, by the way. Thank you so much. This without the coffee. Imagine if I had a coffee if you open. So really like getting, finding the newsletters within your industry, right? So for example, I'm working with a client that she's a veterinarian. And I said, okay, cool. And she's been, launching her podcast. She's been doing really well, but now she wants to grow and market it. Now we're looking at newsletters and conferences where she can get in front of the listeners and promote her podcast. Okay, so think about newsletters, also cross promotion, guesting. Cami alluded to that earlier about being a guest on other people's podcasts, right? They have the listenership, they have the market you want to get in front of. So getting on other people's podcasts, right? So that's kind of some of the tactics on marketing your podcast. And then the last step is monetizing. A lot of the times in clients, and you know this, Cami, people want to start a podcast because they want to make money right out the gate. And I'm like, no. You have to build brand first in that order. You attract an audience, you market the podcast, and then the last step is then you monetize. Now you can actually start having the conversation about how can I make money? You can make money through affiliate marketing, right? Affiliate sales. You can do it with brand sponsorship deals, although that takes some time to build, audience. They need to look at the CPMs of the audience. But also there's other opportunities you can make money. The best way, I know we're talking, she's a health coach here, Sherry. So, the best thing is if you have an offer. If you're a coach and you offer coaching or consulting or a product or service, you can use that and you can become your own sponsor. You can say, this show is sponsored by Health Inspired Coaching. Head over to get a free minute consultation and allowing and leveraging some of the services and some of the things that your organization offers and using that to bring people in and using the podcast to build trust, cultivate an audience, right? But funnel them into a website where now you can actually introduce them to other aspects of your business and brand. And that's pretty much kind of the 4-step framework.
Yeah.
Breaking it down.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for breaking it all the way down. So that gives us a really good area from where to dive in. So starting back at brand, I want to go all the way back to the beginning because I think that's so critical for whenever you launch a podcast. And a lot of reasons people do launch one is for, building their personal brand, building the brand of their company. So can you talk a little bit about why and how to start building your brand with a podcast?
So it goes back to answering that question, Cami, I mentioned earlier is, planting, the flag on the ground. Like, what do you stand for? What is your podcast about? Like, what do you represent? And I think there's obviously the branded assets, right? The external stuff, which is very important. I was talking to Sherry about how she has a fantastic artwork. So having, good colors and having a good artwork, not skipping out on the design, that's important, right? So make sure you hire a professional to be able to do the artwork. That's very important. But more importantly is really understanding what is the reputation that I want to convey to my audience and really understand your values as a brand, right? I was talking earlier with Felicia about, sometimes it's okay to be polarizing. I think a lot of the times people play it safe. It's like, I want to talk about this aspect of the industry, but I want to keep it PC. I want to make sure that I please everybody. And I think podcasting is an opportunity, once again, to plant your flag and say, this is what I believe in. This may not be for you, but this is for this other person. So think about how can, not to polarize for polarizing's sake, right? To just divide people, but really stand for something. If you look at some of the greatest hosts like Oprah Winfrey or Howard Stern, these are talk show hosts that stand for something, right? When you think of Howard Stern, it's controversy, right? It's kind of edgy, provocative. When you think of Oprah Winfrey, you think of motivation, inspiration. So when we're thinking about brand, think about aspects that you can bring to your audience. And when somebody thinks of you or you, Sherry, or somebody out there, what is that one word that they're going to really kind of connect with? And I think understanding and answering, really kind of getting really, really deep into that conversation is where you can really start building a solid brand.
And I think it's great that we're an impact hub. I think that's perfect that we're talking about impact because here we are an impact hub. And I do believe that that impact is so important for what you're doing there on your podcast, right? So having that impact, making that happen, it's is crucial. And I just kind of want to talk about beyond, like, so let's take it a little bit higher. Let's say like a company wants to start a podcast, not a person. So what do you say for that? Like when a company's starting a podcast?
So like a B2B company? Yeah, absolutely. So I think what it is, with podcasting, for a company, I think the opportunity is to say, what are we going to do here? Are we going to educate or entertain? And really kind of digging into that. I think if you look at podcasting as a platform where you're inviting people into your space to educate, I think having that first and infusing that in your brand is super important. Often I see a lot of B2B companies, they'll come up to me and say, hey, Ozeal, I want to start this podcast, but right out the gate, we want to sell products and we want to sell this. And I'm like, you just can't do that with podcasting. Podcasting is about cultivating culture, cultivating community, and really establishing trust first. So I think if you're a B2B, if you're a company, a nonprofit organization, go into this with a leadership approach, with a leadership mindset. I think the best podcasters that are companies are the ones that are saying, we're going to go in here because we want to educate our audience about, sleeping better, about, meditating. We launched a podcast recently. It was a women meditation group, and it's all about helping women meditate and the art of and the benefits of meditating. And of course, she offers other services, but it's all about community and building that. So again, leadership approach is the best way for any company or any brand to really go into podcasting.
I do think what you said earlier, though, and I don't want it to go by really fast, was that you can be your own sponsor. So having like a little bed. So the nice thing about podcasting is if you give a little bit of a break in the middle, it always helps with people to refocus their mind. And at that point, you can have a little ad, I guess you could say, in there, right?
Pre-roll, yeah, absolutely. So there's a pre-roll, right, in the front, and also a mid-roll. And a pre-roll is basically maybe a 10 to 20 second little ad that you insert and say, hey, this show is sponsored by, OzealMedia.com, Ozeal Media, where we, if you're looking to start a podcast. So infusing that in. But I think in the beginning, I would not advise to do that just yet. I think it's a matter of, again, building community, right? Establishing your brand and then attract the audience. And then later on, you can think about monetizing and using pre-rolls and mid-rolls.
I love that. So the timing on it is really important. So audience and building your audience. So attracting an audience for the podcast. So tell me, you just put it up on iTunes and everybody comes, right?
Yes, that's it. You just put it on. Yeah, that's definitely not true. And that's one of the common mistakes and a major roadblock, as you know, Candy, is how can I market this podcast? How can I get it onto people's podcast players? So the cool thing about podcasting is that unlike YouTube is just like one tunnel, right? They're going to go in there and they're going to watch your video and they're going to get out. Podcasting, with a click of a button, you are having global distribution. So I think another big player that just is called Ghana, G-A-A-N-A, and it's a South Asian podcast app, and they're huge into podcasting. So now when you upload, now you're getting global distribution, and they love like English speaking podcasts. So if you're not on Ghana, make sure that you sign up and you subscribe to there, because they have a huge, huge market, great opportunity. So part of marketing your podcast is creating content, and it actually goes beyond this, and you've seen this, Cammie, where you're just saying, here, brand new episode, guys, I just dropped a brand new episode, check it out, take a listen. You have to go a little bit beyond that. You have to give them a blurb, you have to give them more content, more context of what the podcast is about. In this episode, I share with you 5 tips on how you can sleep better, and I also talk about a case study. So make sure that you give them some meat to attract your listener to to listen to the podcast. Often people will go on their Facebook and just post it, but they're your friends and they may not necessarily be your market. So being very strategic about giving them a reason. Why should somebody listen to your podcast? Why should I listen to this particular episode? So I think social media, spend 30 minutes of going on Instagram, hashtag health, inspired health, wellness, or meditation, and start building relationships with them. And then you can say, hey, by the way, I do have a podcast that's centered around the things that we both enjoy. Would you take a listen to it? So also going person to person, P2P. That's something that I've done. I remember going early on, and I was doing a lot of content that was kind of motivational. So I was following Eric Thomas and some of the Les Brown, and I would build relationships under the threads and talk to people And then I would just reach out to them, say, hey, listen, I just did this brand new episode. Would you mind just listening to it? And they became followers, they became subscribers. So getting in the trenches and figuring out where your people are hanging out at, connecting with them, and saying, hey, listen, I have this podcast. And I think that's super important to do.
Yeah. But that is definitely not the first conversation you have with them. Like you
No,
don't,
yes.
you don't pop into their
That's
meetings
spam.
and say,
Listen to
hey,
my podcast.
listen to my podcast. I'm just making sure that
Yeah.
clear about that. The other thing that is really interesting, and I'm just going to bring this up, is that you can also create podcasts that are just for a specific group of people, like private podcasts. So I know that I'm using, some tools and stuff like that to do that and put private podcasts out to specific audiences. So if you already have customers, you can send out private podcasts that, they can't find anywhere else, but you can find, so if you're in their ears. And that's one of the things that's really important about audience, I think, is when you have a podcast and you have listeners, they are listening to you on a regular basis and you're in their ear. It's like they know you, and when they see you, they'll act like, oh, I know you. And you're like, oh, hi. But it's really great because it's a much more intimate way, I guess, to get people into at that point of view. So that's cool. So audience. Oh yeah, we have a little dance around.
Yeah, we have a little background.
There we go. Cool. That's our little sponsor. Our sponsor moment. Impact of Houston.
Okay. Cammie, one thing about that. So Cammie talked about private RSS feed. One thing that we're seeing within major organizations is called internal podcasting, which is corporations and organizations, nonprofit, that are using internal podcasting through private RSS feed to distribute information. So instead of shooting out a newsletter and an email within their employees, now you can actually have an audio format in internal podcasting where maybe the owner, CEO is sharing some of the latest, happenings. And I think that's a very powerful way. And we're seeing now a lot of, we actually launched an internal podcast with Hershey Chocolate. So they're doing one as well. And then Chase, and there's other companies now that are getting involved because they see the power of people just moving and they're just not reading emails anymore. And they just want to go ahead and say, hey, listen, I'm going to listen to this newsletter that my company, distributed, but I'm going to listen to it on my way back from work. We'll see.
And especially now that people are getting back in person, like we are here,
Yeah.
you're going to have car time again. And that's going to be important too, to think about where you can meet these people on the road or if they're out walking or whatever. And so there's some really great ways to do that. And when you're promoting it, it's good to kind of say that too, like, hey, make sure you take us along on your ride and just remind people. I remember, this is like not a podcast necessarily, but I was driving home and there was a little sign for Halal Guys, which they just opened one in our neighborhood. And I've seen it a couple times. I was like, oh, I should go there. And we were hungry. And I looked at that little sign on the side of the road. I said, oh, Halal Guys. It's not like I learned about it from the sign. It just reminded me to do it. So I think people need signposts or reminders to come back to what you're doing. One other thing, and I'll talk to you about this too. So this is a question, but I've used it this way. People will sometimes ask me a question and then I will provide one of my podcast episodes as an answer, like if I've gone into depth into it. So have you done any of that?
Especially coaches, consultants. I've done that where potential clients will say, hey, do you help with this? I'm having issues. And I'll send them specific episodes that are tailored where I'm answering that question. So yes, the answer is yes. I definitely use specific episodes. If somebody's struggling with something specifically, I'd say, hey, this is a great episode. I cover this and let me know if there's anything I can do to help out.
Right. And if you haven't covered it, it's a great way to cover it. And then you go back to them and say, I made this just for you. And they're like, wow, cool.
Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot of questions and answers. So one of the things that was very pivotal for me, so we're seeing a stat now that short form podcast episodes are the ones that are getting most listener retention.
What time?
So about 22 minutes is what Buzzsprout says. So anything 22 minutes, I don't know, I think 22, I mean 20, a short form. But I remember I did a switch where I was doing long form interview podcasts, 45 minutes to an hour. And people enjoy those, right? However, I started going 10 minutes, short form, 5 minutes, and people were giving me so much feedback saying, man, thank you so much. I really, really dig the short form. And why? Because I think the stats show that people now are listening to multiple podcasts, whereas before they would listen to maybe one or two and they can go with a 45-minute interview. But now they're just going, they want to get in and they want to get out, they want to get into the next episode or podcast, et cetera. So they're listening to like 8 to 10 podcasts now. So it's gotten competitive. So you got to make sure when you interview or whenever you do your podcast episode, you can get right to it. Be concise, bright. Brevity is going to be king for you, especially with this new form of podcasting.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. The only time I think you would do it longer is if you knew that you were catering to an audience that had like a 30-minute commute or something like that. Because I've heard complaints. You'll hear complaints from your audience, and they're like, gosh, it ended like 10 minutes before the end of my drive, and that was too little. But usually people don't want more; they want less. I agree with that. And so the cool thing is also you just said something that's really important that we haven't covered, and that's getting guests on your show. This, I think, is one of the most critical ways for you to build your own brand, to be honest. So could you talk a little bit about that and why having guests on your show actually is a good thing for you?
Yeah. So we're seeing a huge market, and there's actually companies now that are dedicated to saying, hey, if you are a thought leader or a coach, we'll put you on people's podcasts and get you in front of your audience. People paying a lot of money for that.
Ridiculous.
Now, right?
I'm like, no, I'm not paying for that.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of money. We're talking about thousands of dollars for targeted podcasts. But the power in that is that it's a very target-focused audience. So if I am a health coach and I can get on another health podcast, it's very target-focused. That's the reason why the ad revenue is huge in podcasting. Now it's $1 billion business. Because if I have, as a matter of fact, let me give this real quick case study. There was a guy that I launched a podcast for, and he is into golfing. It's called Private Club Podcast. And he had an audience of like maybe 300, 400. It wasn't a lot, but he was getting like thousands of dollars of free stuff and also paid ads because he had a very target focus. He was so consistent. He was releasing 2 episodes a week. He had a weekly newsletter. So when he pitched it to other companies, they were like, hey, listen, you're consistent, you're target focused, and these golf clubs are very expensive. And sure enough, they were paying him thousands of dollars just to advertise through there because it was a target focus. So what's happening now, going back to the question, Cami, is guesting a great opportunity. If you want to guest, you can go on Apple in the search engine and put in the name of the industry and just make a list of the top 20, right? Top 20 podcasts in your industry. And then, you can reach out to them. But the question that you need to ask yourself before pitching them is what value are you going to bring to their audience? Okay, so I get pitched a lot, and you've gotten pitched a lot, but they're promoting their latest book or their product or service. So even creating like a one-page media kit of saying, these are the topics that I'm going to share with you. If this resonates with you and your audience, by all means, let's book a session. So, allowing Apple, using that, making a list, reaching out to them and letting them know, hey, listen, I'm going to promote this podcast episode as well. And here's a little trick. This is what I used to do to grow my audience. I would get on major, so I got on John Lee Dumas podcast, right? Major entrepreneur podcast. Yes. So thank you. So I got on his podcast, major show, right? Thousands of listeners. So when I got the episode, I actually boosted ads. I put money into that where I was promoting that. So that 10x my download numbers and my viewership. So anyway, so those are kind of some tips to do, but guessing is powerful. Reach out to them, bring value to them, and then I think that's a great opportunity, definitely to 10x your audience.
Yeah, I'm glad you said the thing about advertising. So that is something, if you're willing to do it, that actually works really well, is that when you put out a podcast episode, if you then put it on, like, say, Facebook, Instagram, and you run an ad, and then people go to it, it can become the start of your funnel. Do you know what I'm saying? So they watch it, they listen to it in this case, and then you go back and then you can retarget those people for whenever you're launching something. So the way that the thing works is the pixels on your website, and it gathers all of those people, and then you can retarget them when you're ready to launch your actual program or product. And so it's a great way. Also, you can do it with video, same thing. But it's a really great way to do it, and kind of cheap. I mean, grabbing video views and stuff is a lot, and listens and people that click over to the page is less than trying to sell something on Facebook or Instagram.
Aside from that, too, I just thought of this, Kevin, is Google is playing in our sandbox. So they're investing heavily into podcasting.
So is Amazon.
So and Amazon as well.
Yeah.
So if your website, if you have a nonprofit organization or your health coach or whatever it is, if you have a website and you have your podcast hosted on your website, Google will give you extra love, and they'll show your URL and they'll show a list of all of your podcast episodes. So they are playing very heavy, and they're definitely leaning more towards SEO. So there's a lot of SEO power in podcasting simply by you hosting it on your website. Which, by the way, if you start a podcast, don't put it on Anchor. Have a website. Own your domain.
Yes, please.
Ownership, and that's the beauty. Having your own RSS feed, have it on there, and that way, if something happens where they pull the plug, it'll be hosted on your website and it's covered. So that's another thing about a benefit of having a podcast on your website.
Yeah, no, I love that. So the SEO is there. That it really is a generator of things for you. If you're consistent and you keep coming out and you keep staying with it, it's really, really powerful. I love that. So I'm going to actually start to ask questions from the audience. Also online, if you're out there, Tracy is sitting back there, and I know you don't see her, but she's right there, and she's going to tell us if you have any questions. So definitely put your questions in the comments, and she can see those, and she will give them to us. So we will answer your questions as well. So anybody have a question to start? Yeah, Ms. Ika.
You talked about like the short form. How important is it to really grab attention at the very beginning of the podcast? And do you have any tips for doing that?
Okay, so that question was, how do you grab attention right at the beginning of your podcast, and in the short form, how do you grab that attention?
Yeah, getting right into it. In this episode, I'm going to share with you 3 tips and get right into the meat of things. One thing that we used to see back in the days where the host would do this long-winded, hey guys, welcome to the No Permission Needed podcast. This podcast is for, and it would be this very long-winded intro. Now what we're seeing is getting right into it. And I remember when I did that, I checked the analytics and people were dropping off. I'm like, okay, I'm talking too much. So I need to keep it brief, right? So now, again, you got to go right into it. In this episode, we're going to talk about very kind of much like the YouTubers. If you see the really good YouTubers, Nell and Dallin, they do a great job of saying in this episode, or in this video, I'm going to share with you 3 tips on how to market to get right into it. So yeah, keep it brief, right into it.
One of the things I've also seen, just to answer that again, is that, you could, because it is not live, you're doing a recording and going all the way through. And then some people go through and they take the most important part of the entire podcast where they said something really exciting. They pull it out, they put it at the beginning. Yeah. And then they do a little bed like that's, hey, welcome to the podcast, not too long, very short. And then they go straight in.
It's a hook.
It's a hook.
It's a hook to get them.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, so my question, going back to owning your own content and doing it from your website. So multiple podcasts, and I'm kind of varied. I've been like uploading it onto Podbean, down for that. But I remember last year at some point, one of the RSS went down for a little while, and one of my friends was one of the people that lost content. So I have thought about doing it on my own website.
Yes.
Analytics. How do you get analytics from your website? Like, I know there's a way to do it.
Okay. Yeah. So you're using Podbean right now, which is one kind of place where you can put up your RSS feed and get it started.
Yeah.
We can talk about tech. Like, that's going to be really important. But your question was, how do you get analytics from your website for your podcast?
Yeah.
There's a couple plugins. There's Pod Analytics. It's a plugin on WordPress that gives you some information, but and it's not all that great. Unfortunately, the analytics in the podcasting space hasn't evolved just yet. It's gotten better. Apple has done a really good job, but they're showing, native. But as far as your website, Pod Analytics will give you a little gist of it, but it's really hard. And I think that's where we're going towards, is actually having analytics that will track podcast listenership through your website. But most Podbean will show you, I know Buzzsprout does, right?
Yeah.
Where the website,
It's really good.
you're getting clicks, yeah.
Well, I have a follow-up question. So if
Yes.
you own your RSS feed, I mean, is there a way, like, because actually Spotify has really good analytics, and they
They
do
do.
that whole like Bravo thing at the end of the year. So can you do it on your website and then have it on Spotify to,
Okay, so you're still going to have to, okay, she asked the question, are you going to be able to put it on your website and also on Spotify? So you're going to have to host it somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be hosted on your website. You're just going to have it
Right.
on your website as a player. Okay, so I'm sorry, it's a technical glitch, but you would bring it in, and there's like, so if you have Libsyn or you have like Bcast or whatever you have, you would put it onto your website as the player.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, and for those who understand podcasting, so podcasting simply, you record, right? It's MP3. You record it into a GarageBand or Audacity. We'll talk about software in a bit. And it's an MP3, and you put that into a hosting service, which is basically the home base. They're going to be hosting the audio. when you upload the MP3 to the hosting service, and there's a few that we'll go over, they will, with one click of a button, you hit publish, and they dish it out to Spotify, Apple, Ghana, all these major 20 plus podcast players. So I think that's a really cool thing about the podcast. Sometimes somebody asks me, like, well, I want to do a podcast, but do I need to upload individually to all the other players, Spotify, Apple, and Google? No, you just click one button and it's distributed all over. So that's another cool thing about that. But yeah, you do it through your hosting service, yes.
Cami talks a lot about reusing content, and so she often makes longer form videos, and then you can make them shorter videos.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever do that with your podcast, like make the 45 and then shorten them, or is it just short and just long because of the podcast?
Video, you mean? Are you referring to video?
For your
For audio?
Yes.
I know. So she's asking, so Tracy was asking, how do you repurpose a podcast episode?
Ooh, okay. So you can chop it up. So I think it's focusing on highlights, so thinking about if you're interviewing somebody, if they say something that's really profound or there's some good tips, you can actually cut that up and repurpose that. And then you can, use audiograms, which is kind of the visual audiogram aspect, to also use that to promote and market the podcast back to the full episode. So yes, we can definitely do that. Yeah. Great question.
It is. Yes, Ken.
Do you think podcast and video are separate entities, or do you recommend combining them?
Okay, yeah, this is a good question. Yeah, I know.
That's a
This is
great
one
question,
I've talked about a lot.
We're talking about that.
So yeah, we are. So can do you think of podcasting and video as separate, or can you kind of combine them? So I know some people are doing a podcast, and so could you talk
Video cast.
video,
yeah.
whatever they call it. So can you talk about that a bit?
I think you're qualified for that because
I know.
you're rocking it. So my thoughts are, and we were talking about this earlier, is respect the platform, meaning that there are live streamers now that are doing like live casting, if you want to call it, but they're getting shout outs and they're using visuals, but they're not understanding that the audio audience is not going to get that. So you got to respect the platform first. And I think that's a big mistake that we're seeing video podcasters make, is not able to translate the visual component into audio. So if you are mindful of the fact that, hey, listen, we're going to go video, but my audio listeners are listening to this podcast, you can do it. We're seeing a big trend of video podcasting. YouTube was at a conference last year, actually recently, about 6 months ago, and they were saying they're going to invest heavy. And what's happening is that in a year from now, we're going to see YouTube have hosting services for podcasts.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We're seeing not only, the major, we're seeing a lot of brands now that are, and I'm seeing like a lot of fitness influencers now, they're doing video and podcasting because they're using both video component branding and audio. So we're going to see a growing trend of YouTube video podcasts growing, but definitely respect both. But yeah, it's growing. It's coming.
So before I ask one more question, I want to just add on, and I forgot to say this, but LinkedIn is also considering doing a podcasting thing. So they're coming in. I mean, they already have live streaming for some,
Social audio,
which I'm doing now.
Yeah.
LinkedIn. But they're actually going to start a podcasting service. So I don't know how that's all going to look or what that's going to be, but everybody's trying to get in on this. So one of the things I would suggest, just as somebody who does video casting, I have not turned it into a podcast for the reason that Ozeal said, because if I do, I feel like I'm shouting out people. It's just not the right thing. I know, I'm a podcaster, so I understand that you can't do that. So one thing that you could do, which I'm thinking about doing myself, is doing my video stream for half an hour, stopping it, coming back into StreamYard, which I use, and like just doing a record only and doing it again in a shorter version, like 10 minutes, like just like really, really short, and turning that into the podcast. So, I mean, you can double up on your time, and make sure that you're using your time wisely. And then you can, if you have a guest, which is another thing we talked about, one of the nice things about having guests onto your podcast or your program is that you can actually connect with people that you would never be able to connect with otherwise. That's just the truth.
Yeah.
You can get people onto your podcast. They're willing to come. They're willing to talk to you. You can open up so many doors with a podcast. Yeah. Just saying. That's a little bit of a side. But when you have a guest, if you're going to do that, you can say, hey, we're going to do a real quick live stream. And if you could just hold for a minute, we're going to do a quick, like 10-minute Q&A that's going to be like kind of mirror that. So just let them know ahead of time what you're going to do. And most people are willing to do that.
Yeah, Absolutely.
Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great strategy. And I also want to add, because you mentioned about having interviews.
Mhm.
So interview-based podcasts are great to really build network. So if you
Okay.
really want to build
Yeah.
network within your industry, interview other people in your industry. Okay, a massive opportunity there. And if you do solo shows, that's where you really establish your brand authority.
brand.
So there's a lot of people. I had a client who was just doing interviews, but she was struggling to build a personal brand because it was interview based, and obviously the focus was on the guest.
Yeah.
So she really struggled. So I suggested start doing solo shows. Let your listeners know what you are, that what you represent, and some of the coaching services, and what you bring to the ecosystem. So she started doing a hybrid of interviews and solo
the hybrid.
shows.
It's great.
Yeah, exactly.
I
That's
do
a great
that.
sweet
Yeah,
spot. Yeah.
so good.
And now she has a great personal brand in addition to expanding her network. So that's something that you should think about.
No, I love that. That's such a great point. And you've had your hand up forever. So Tracy,
Oh, yeah.
you have somebody online, I'm sure.
Yes, Elwayne Ashley is on LinkedIn.
Hi, Ellie.
And the question is how many episodes do you need to bank before you launch?
Oh,
your
that's so good.
podcast?
So Ellen wants to know, how many episodes do you need to bank before you launch? Hopefully you said your name right. There it is.
So what was the name again? What was it?
Elwayne
Elwayne.
Ashley.
Elwayne. Hello. Okay. So I would suggest 4 to 5 episodes in the can. Front load the content. Why? Because that gives you room, especially when you're first starting off, to not only have your marketing campaign ready to go. You could do a pre-launch strategy where you say, hey, a month from now, you have episodes in the can. You say, hey, we're launching a podcast. It's coming out. It's going to be centered around this. We're really pumped up, and start, building anticipation for the podcast launch. And then having that in the can, it just, this can, it just gives you a breather to relax, to enjoy it. And once you launch it, there's something just really relieving about knowing that there's 5 episodes in the can ready to go, and you just focus on marketing and building the audience.
Yeah, that's the thing about it, is like with marketing and with creation, there's like sort of a yin and yang, and it's like you can get really behind. So I like to have things banked.
Yeah.
So like, whenever I'm doing a podcast, I sit down and we'll do 4 at a time, or 3 or 2, or whatever you can do without like completely killing yourself. You get those in the bank, and then that way, whenever those go out, your marketing, you have time to market them. You're not like, oh, I got to get on to the next one and like make the next one. What's the next one going to be? And we talk a lot about content and how to like have that in the bank, and I can talk more about that in a minute. But is there more questions online yet? No. Is there some in the room? Yes.
What's the frequency when you're starting out?
What is a good frequency for content when you're starting out?
Weekly.
Yep.
Yeah. I would say weekly, once a week. Also get realistic and be, very practical. If we have a lot of busy entrepreneurs, business people, and they're just busy, the strategy is content batching. Is set one day. I record on Sundays, and I just record 4 episodes, and I have a month of content ready lined up to go. So that's a great strategy. But weekly, if you really want to grow your podcast, 2 episodes a week that's ideal. But in the beginning, since you're just kind of getting in the trenches and you're learning the process, once a week, I think it's a great way to start.
Yeah, and there's a why on that too. So the weekly gets people in the habit of listening to you, and people kind of forget about you. I mean, let's face it, we're not all that exciting, right? So people kind of forget about you if you're not out there all the time. Like I've taken breaks before, and it just takes a minute to kind of get back in the swing when you take a break. People forgot who you are. They're like, oh yeah, and they'll unsubscribe. So they'll come and look and see, oh, nothing's happened here in a month, and they'll be like, oh, should I just unsubscribe? Yeah, you'll get a lot of unsubscribes if you don't keep it. So at least every other week, okay? So for those of you who are like, I can't do it weekly, every other week would be fine.
I'm going to ask you that, Cami. Yes, training your listeners. So to piggyback what Cami said, it's important you train them. Like your favorite TV show, when it's going to drop. People are going to expect that. So it's important that you stay consistent and you train your listeners when you're going to show up. The best time to launch your podcast is in the morning. Don't launch it during the day. So if you say you're going to launch it on Monday, the best time to launch is Monday to Thursday. There was a stat showing that people that launch podcasts Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays did not get enough traction. So Monday morning, have it scheduled for 4 a.m. in the morning, 5 a.m., where people are going on their commute, depending on what time zone. But early in the morning, at the same time, every single, and you get them trained so they know when you're going to be dropping the episode. So that's very, very important, that consistency.
Yeah, I love that. So that's great. Any other questions going on here? Let's talk. How about tech? I want to talk tech. Talk tech.
Talk tech. That's the name of a podcast, I'm sure. Talk tech podcast.
Talk tech.
Talk tech.
Cool. So tell me, like, if I'm going to start my podcast
Yeah.
with Ozeal, what would you tell me I need to do? Give me all the technical tips I need to get started.
You got to get that $300 Joe Rogan mic if you want to sound like Joe. Just kidding, guys. Just kidding. Don't do that. Don't do that. We have people that want to get all the fancy Joe Rogan.
Audio Technica.
Yeah, exactly. They
Well, that's
want all the fancy things. Yeah. So yeah, it is. It is. So a Samson Q2U. So Samson SAMSON Q2U. It's I think $69.
Yeah, it's cheap.
Super cheap. It's a USB mic, connects right to your laptop or desktop. Great audio quality. Yes, so Samson. So SAMSON Q2U. $69. Great quality. Audio Technica. Can you mention that? Audio Technica 2100. It's about $100. Great quality mic. One thing for our viewers watching this and everybody in this room, podcasting is an audio-based platform. Do not, I repeat, do not skip out on the audio. Okay, don't go, I was gonna say Radio Shack, I don't think Radio Shack exists, I'm sure not. But don't go and use your laptop microphone. Don't record in the bathroom. Make sure you invest in a good microphone and use that. I was surprised when I was during COVID, where like Ryan Seacrest and all these big broadcasters were doing remote, but the audio was horrible. I was like, what's happening? Like, you guys have all this money and budget and y'all can't even get mic'd up. Now I thought that was so
Little Road.
I was shocked. Yeah, Road or something. I was so shocked. I'm like, come on, you guys have money. But I'm like, welcome to our world, guys. Like, yeah. So I was always, so again, make sure that you invest in a microphone. Do not do it through your desktop or laptop. Very, very important. Audio Technica, Samson, and also software. So Audacity, if you're a PC user, it's free. AUDACITY, free to download. GarageBand, if you are a MacBook user, super easy to use. I believe in YouTube University, there's amazing tutorials to teach you how to edit your podcast. It's usually kind of intro, the content and outro. That's kind of like the framework of a podcast. Get creative with it. But in the beginning, you can start there. And then a hosting service, right? Like Buzzsprout. Libsyn is a big one.
LYB.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need to make sure we spell that out. Simplecast. And there's a ton of others. So if you need any recommendations, but that's basically it. A hosting service, a microphone, and recording software. That's the podcast. That's it.
Mm-hmm, true. And starting out, not fancy is fine. It's absolutely fine. And I've actually used StreamYard to do my recordings as well. Just StreamYard, record. And what's cool about StreamYard is that it lets you download the audio only. So that's really cool. Yeah. You can do it that way too. That's right. There's a lot of really great ways you can do that. And so that's what I would recommend too. I like that. So great. So yeah.
So if we plan to have guests and record on-site versus like in a podcast studio, what do you recommend? Like if we want to go to a bar while it's quiet hours or a coffee shop?
Okay, so how do you record in person with your guest for your podcast?
Invite them to the closet, man. Say, hey, we're gonna go in the closet.
It needs to be very quiet.
Yeah. It has to be very quiet. So one of the things that we're seeing, a lot of co-working spaces are now having a podcast. There's one called Exception Studio. Exception Podcast Studio. There's one called Houston Podcast Studio out in the Southwest area. And just reach out to me if you're like in the area, you're looking for a podcast studio. Mm-hmm. So people are renting out podcast studio. I think it's like $40, $50 an hour, I think. And they have everything set up where you can go there and set up, plug, and you invite them over and then you record there. So having a sound treated room is very important. Depending on the type of guest in your show, the bar and all that, but just be mindful of how loud it is. I think adding a little ambiance is always nice, but just be mindful of the fact. And that's when you really need a microphone to make sure you cut out the noise. Oh, another thing, speaking of microphone, dynamic microphone. Okay.
Yeah, dynamic.
So, there's a condenser mic and a dynamic microphone. Make sure you get a dynamic microphone. It cuts out all the external noise, especially if you're doing a lot of on-site type of stuff. So does that answer your question, though? Like as far as that, okay, yeah. So studios, yep.
Yes. So what do you do when you're interviewing somebody remotely, which we do? What do you tell them? I usually give them a lot of like advice, but I want to hear your advice.
Okay. Okay, so you could use the Samsung Q2U that we mentioned, or Audio Technica. You can do that as well. So yes, I've done that before. So the question is, do you send it to them? One of the things that I do is I give them a pre-recording checklist, and I'll say, hey, listen, to ensure the quality of this podcast episode, I strongly suggest that you get access to a headset or a microphone. Oftentimes, if you don't do that and they have poor quality, sometimes controlling, the audio quality on their end, you can't do nothing about it. So you don't want to sound amazing and your guest sounds horrible. So asking them and giving them a checklist, make sure you have a microphone or a headset. I've done it before where they're like, they didn't have access to it, and I would send them a microphone. And say, here's my, because I want to make sure the audio quality sounds good.
Tracy has two, yeah, from the audience.
One thing is Sandra Fernandez.
Hi, Sandra.
Okay, Sandra.
She's sharing that Houston Media Source has an internet radio
They do.
station.
Oh, yes.
They do.
Houston Media Source has an internet
Yeah.
radio station
That's right.
that we can,
And I'm gonna put their
you
website.
can rent out or get. I think it's free, isn't it? Or really small.
It's a
cost.
small one-time producer fee, and the monthly access is free. And I put
Producer
their
fee. Yeah.
source there.
Yep.
And then Bart Graham, whom
Hi,
we know
Bart.
very well, he has a question about if your guest is in one place and the host is another. Do you do how do you feel about that? I think
So if the guest is in one place and the host is another, how do you feel? Yes. And I want to say something before I do that, because one of the cool things, again, I'm hyping StreamYard, sorry, but the cool thing about StreamYard is that it has something on it that helps with it has like some magic on the inside of it that helps a little bit with the other side. So as long as they have like an earbud in, generally I can get good audio from them, or decent audio, even without like a mic, although it's better. You can also buy those Rode cordless mics, lavaliers. And if somebody's going to call you from their phone, right? So you can give them a lavalier, like a Rode, and one dongle goes into the back of their phone, and one goes on their chest. And then I think it's like $100. I mean, it's a $200 thing if you're doing this. But if you're a company and you're sending it out to a bunch of people, it's worth it, right? And then they can send it back to you. Send it with a return FedEx envelope that all they have to do is just send it right back to you. And that Rode thing works really, really well. Yeah, I see a lot of the podcasters with it now. So it's RODE, not.
Yeah. I use it. I use the Rode Wireless. So, and also as far as software, so there's StreamYard, which is amazing, right? Which Karen uses, I've used as well for streaming. Also Zencaster.
Oh yeah,
So Zencaster, Zencastr. There's also a Riverside.fm that on the back end, they do some magic, and they can also give you great audio quality if your guest doesn't have great quality. And then the other one is Squadcast.fm, and those are the major players. So if you want to do remote podcasting, those are tools. People still use Zoom. Okay, I'm not sure how you feel about Zoom, but I would probably take StreamYard over Zoom if you had to go about. Yeah, go ahead.
Zoom has too much noise in it.
Yeah,
Like it's too. I don't like Zoom on that. It just doesn't cater to recording. Whereas like a Zencaster or a Riverside, what's cool about them is that you end up with two files.
Yeah, that's right.
Like you end up with your own personal file of your voice and the file of the other person's voice. So if it's off, you can like fix it in post-production.
Right.
Well, I know that's very complicated, but for most of you, you won't have to worry about all that. But it is a really cool thing to be able to do that.
Ooh, I have another resource. I'm thinking about this. Okay. Write this one down. You probably use it. If you don't, you should be.
Okay.
Auphonic. 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 Auphonic.
So
Okay.
good.
So auphonic.com.
I'll bring a bell next
All
time.
right. So after you record your episode, okay, you upload this to Auphonic. It's free. I think they give you 2 hours of free production. You upload it, and you hit a button, and they master your audio to like high quality podcast standard on Apple, where you're gonna sound nice, loud, clear, and to be super professional. So Auphonic Once you record your MP3, you upload it, and then you use their download to upload to your hosting service. So highly recommend Auphonic.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool. I've got a little thing on my computer too, which is like, I think that is some sort of thing like that. Yeah, a mastering thing. I'll have to look at it and tell you what it is here in a minute. It's right there. I can't see. But yeah, so it is 10 o'clock, guys. And so I'm going to actually end the live stream. Thank you guys so much for being here. For those of you who are here, we're going to hang out and talk and chat. And if you have any other questions, you can stay for a few minutes, Ozeal, right? And we will let you ask your questions here. If you do have any questions out there in social media land, definitely put it in the comments and we will get back to you about that. Thank you, Ozeal, so much for being here. Did you give us a hand?
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, this is so exciting. I'm glad you came back for our first one. So thanks, guys, very much. We're out.